Quote, the communists have lost control. Cuba is descending into chaos as protests erupted across the country and have now devolved into riots as people are pushing back against the communist regime, chanting things like liberty, freedom, and down with dictatorship. Of course, in the U.S., we're hearing the media say that they're protesting no food and they're protesting COVID. No, these people are protesting the dictatorship, the authoritarian regime of their country, which resulted in a failure to get supplies and a lack of food. We're now getting reports that the communists have opened fire, live ammunition, on many of these demonstrators. One person has died, but other witnesses are saying that hundreds are being beaten, jailed, or even disappeared, and there are many who are missing. In a shocking turn, an independent journalist on live television speaking with a Spanish TV journalist was detained, arrested, and taken from her home on live television. It's hard to know exactly what's going on in Cuba because communists do not want people to find out what is going on. Now, I can't sit here and pretend that the current Democratic Party or the law enforcement agencies in the U.S. are perfect. In fact, they're far from it. They're pretty bad. But we do have substantially more press freedoms. We'll see how things play out, however. There are some reports the Biden administration is going to be putting out a list of extremist influencers, conservatives, that the insurrectionists were following. Now, I'm not going to speak too much about the U.S., but I want to highlight, these things can happen here. But at least for now, what's happening in Cuba seems to be that the Communist Party is faltering. They've shut down the internet in an attempt to stop people from spreading information. Ron DeSantis of Florida said he wants to find a way to supply these individuals in Cuba with access to the internet. Strangely, however, the Democrats have come out and basically said they will not accept any refugees from Haiti or Cuba at this time, and they will be sent to other third-party countries. It's very strange considering they allow many others to just basically enter the country. And the Biden administration was recently exposed in a videotape smuggling migrant children into other states in the dead of night. Some have criticized the Biden administration because, they've said that these Cubans who are coming into Florida, they're likely not going to support Democrats politically, or their family members likely won't be voting for Democrats. So, of course, the Democrats don't want those people to actually come to the U.S. I think what we're seeing here in the U.S. is also very bad, with prices skyrocketing. You take a look at what's happening in Cuba, and the media wants to say it's food shortages and COVID. Well, here in the United States, we have an economic shutdown. We have massively exploding prices and a consumer price index skyrocketing, gas prices skyrocketing. We may be dangerously on this path. So we need to make sure we're paying attention to what's going on in South Africa as well as Cuba. And as it pertains to Cuba, this is something much, much bigger. I mean, Cuba has been under communist rule for decades, for generations. This could be the end, but we don't know for sure. Let's read the news and see exactly what's going on. Why are they killing people? Where are these people being detained? I think we understand what communists do. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member to help support our fierce and independent journalism, and you will get access to exclusive members-only podcasts from the Timcast IRL show, where we talk about a lot of things that YouTube would actually ban us for. But we're expanding rapidly. We have a new website launching soon, hopefully within the next week or so, and we've got a ton of new journalists, and we're going to be doing on-the-ground reporting, as well as producing new cultural content. That's with your support as a member over at timcast.com. But don't forget, like this video right now. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and share this video with your friends and family and anybody who's willing to listen. Post it on social media. The same is true for any other video on YouTube you watch. If you truly support the messaging and the content being produced, sharing it overcomes the censorship, which is getting a lot worse. And you need only look to places like Cuba, because if we do not stay vigilant and push back against what's going on, it could affect us here in the United States. Let's read this first story and see exactly what's happening. The Daily Mail reports, quote, the communists have lost control. First Cuban demonstrator is killed after police open fire on peaceful protest, while anti-government reporter is arrested live on TV as unrest continues. They say Diubis Lorencio Tejeda, 36, died on Monday in a suburb of Havana during a clash between protesters and police, the Interior Ministry said. The ministry said Tejeda was part of a group of protesters that had attacked a government facility in the La Guinera neighborhood of Havana and did not say what caused his death. But witnesses said security forces had responded with gunfire after some demonstrators had thrown rocks at them. I think the communists have lost control. They won't have a solution to the situation, said resident Waldo Herrera, 49. The people are tired of so much humiliation, so much repression. Meanwhile, social media activist Dina Stars was arrested live on television by Cuban security forces while speaking with Spain TV host Marta Flitch on Tuesday about the protest. Thousands of Cubans took to the streets on Cuba on Sunday while chanting "Down with the dictatorship" in the biggest anti-government demonstrations on the communist-run island in decades. Cubans are protesting over high prices and food shortages and other grievances against the government, such as their handling of the pandemic. The protest continued on Monday in the southern Havana suburb of La Guinera, where Tejeda died and several others, including members of the security forces, were hospitalized with injuries, according to state-run media. I'm going to pause for a second and reflect on the political differences, I suppose, between what's happening here and what's happening in Cuba. You know, we saw Antifa and BLM destroy buildings and attack police and government buildings. We saw people in D.C. riot at the Capitol. We absolutely have tumult and unrest. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what tactic you use, because if one side supports your cause, they'll support your actions. A good example is the Gravel Institute. The Gravel Institute seeks to be the left-wing response to PragerU. They have many celebrities who are doing videos for them. After the insurrection, they call it, at the Capitol, the Gravel Institute tweeted that they supported the tactics, but not the people. You see the issue here. Many of these leftists will act like they oppose the actions of those at the Capitol, but they absolutely support the actions, just not the individuals and the ideology they represent. When we're looking at individuals clashing with communist dictatorship, we in the United States typically support those fighting against the regime. And let me explain something to you. I'm not a fan of throwing rocks. I'm not a fan of violence and the destruction of property and everything like that. But there's a big difference between what's happening in the U.S. and what's happening in Cuba. The people in Cuba get disappeared. They get arrested on live television. And we have similar things here in the U.S., don't get me wrong. But we do have substantially more press freedoms. And for the most part, you won't be shot and killed by the police during a protest. Now, the police, I think, actually in the George Floyd riots, the cops were more likely to be shot than the rioters themselves, because the police here use crowd control weapons, not live ammo, for the most part. There's certainly circumstances where the police may, and where citizens may start using live ammo. But when you cross that threshold is when you start to recognize that things may be going south. In South Africa right now, there's audio circulating where they say they're running out of ammo. The rioters are burning down different cities and buildings. It's getting really, really bad. I'm not a fan of the destruction. I'm not a fan of the chaos and the clashes. I don't like to hear that someone lost their life. But the communists of Cuba are the ones who escalate. We can certainly respect the right of individuals to protest, mass noncompliance, the shutting down of roads. Now, a lot of conservatives don't, but I think civil disobedience is a good thing, because those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. So I'll put it simply. Politically, principally, and based on my philosophy, I support those who would fight against communist dictatorship. I will not support communist revolutionaries in my country trying to burn down our buildings. I also will not support the corrupt establishment and their intelligence agencies that violate people's rights in an effort to maintain power, because they may as well be the communists. And in fact, it may be that many of them actually are at this point. And so it's funny when you see that they're fighting amongst themselves, basically. They go on to say at the Daily Mail, hundreds had taken to the streets of La Guinera, shouting slogans like "Down with communism" and "Freedom for the people of Cuba," according to two residents and video footage seen by Reuters. Some started throwing rocks at security forces, who eventually responded with gunfire, said Herrera. A witness saw dozens of police carrying sticks departing La Guinera late Monday. Activists say the government is using so-called rapid reaction brigades, government-organized bands of civilian recruits, to counter protesters. The protest in La Guinera was spearheaded by antisocial and criminal elements that had tried to reach the police station with the aim of attacking its officials and damaging infrastructure, said the state-run Cuban news agency. Doesn't this sound familiar? But hey, The Communist Party of Cuba, it's a dictatorship. People are fleeing Cuba to America. So let me put it very simply. I don't like the burning down of buildings. I can say it a million times. But my main opposition is to the communist insurrectionists and their communist allies in other communist countries. It's mostly about authoritarians. I don't care if you're a communist or a fascist, you're bad. In the United States, Antifa and BLM are more akin to communists. I say that because they don't overtly call themselves communists nor adhere to the Communist Party necessarily. But basically, when we see the communist dictatorship in Cuba, it is those elements, and we have the DSA supporting them. The Democratic Socialists of America International Committee tweeted out, the DSA stands with the Cuban people and their revolution in this moment of unrest and the blockade. They are not saying they support the protesters. When they say they support the revolution, they're talking about the communists who control the country. No, the DSA people in the United States, their Antifa allies and Black Lives Matter cannot be allowed to win. And so they must be stopped because it really is at the end of the day about ideology and opposing authoritarianism. I'll oppose the authoritarianism from Biden and our law enforcement agencies, as well as the extremist communists. They go on to say, the protest in La Guinera was spearheaded by antisocial elements, they said. When security forces stopped them, they vandalized homes, set containers on fire, and damaged the suburb's electricity wiring, attacking officials with stones and other objects, the agency said. I'm not a fan of that. They should not be attacking homes. On Tuesday, Stars, who has been vocal in her criticism of the government, was arrested while speaking about the protest from her home in Cuba. During the interview, her friend is seen telling her that the police were waiting outside her home and forced her to end the interview. Security is out there. I have to go out, Stars told Marta Flitch. As Stars stands up, she said, I make the government responsible for whatever happens to me. Stars returns moments later to the video interview to tell Flitch that she's being taken by the police officers to the station. She was unsure whether she was being arrested, but said she was being taken alone without her friends. They're taking me to police HQ, live via Spain. I will hold the government responsible for whatever happens to me, she informed viewers. That's a scary thought. When the government shows up to your house and says, get in the car, that could be your end. You don't know what they'll do to you. Additional footage posted on Twitter appears to show Stars being escorted by two police officers into a vehicle outside her building. Before her arrest, Stars tweeted out that she had been called by the Interior Ministry to request a meeting, and when she refused, they said they would serve her legal summons. She tweeted, I have just been called on the phone by people from the MINT, the Ministry of the Interior of the Republic of Cuba, who at the time summoned me to meet. I said no. They told me that they were going to give me a legal summons. As soon as I get the summons, I will attend with my head held high. I have nothing to hide. I keep you up to top. It was unclear whether Stars had been released by the police. The activists' alleged arrest comes after 2 days of protests in Cuba, which the government blame on the U.S. On Sunday, Cubans marched on Havana's Malecon Promenade and dwelt elsewhere on the island to protest food shortages, restrictions on civil liberties, the government's handling of the pandemic, and soaring inflation, which some economists believe could hit 900% this year. The mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez, said on Tuesday that U.S. President Joe Biden should consider airstrikes on Cuba in support of Havana dissidents living in the United States. Talk of possible American military action in Cuba prompted warnings Tuesday from Iran, Russia, and China. Could this be the catalyst for Thucydides' trap? Or the catalyst in the fourth turning? Maybe. Maybe it's not really a good answer, though, is it? Just suffice it to say that we are sitting in a dangerous predicament. We are on the edge of war and have been for some time. Now, things getting pretty scary. Alleged witness asks Florida friend to let world know police brutality followed Havana protest. Vito Lanave said his friend in Cuba was panicking. The South Florida resident said his friend in Havana sent him text messages asking him to tell his friends in Miami that Cuban police officers were arresting, beating, and killing unarmed civilians. Lanave, an 81-year-old New Yorker of Italian descent, said he made many Cuban friends while he was a member of an organization in Hialeah. He learned how to use an encrypted app to stay in touch with those who went back to Havana to be with family. Cuban officials did not report the alleged violence during a Monday news conference. On Sunday night, Lanave received text messages from a friend in Havana. Quote, "My life and my family's could be at risk. Things are getting out of hand here," his friend wrote, later adding, "I have video of the government killing civilians. Please, they're killing us." Lanave shared 2 videos he said were from witnesses of police brutality. He said witnesses who didn't participate in the protests were afraid to go public. Lanave said he told his friend to stay home and avoid speaking English because he could be wrongly accused of working for the U.S. government. It's real bad. He is never in that much panic. He said he witnessed a couple people being shot. Lanave said, he said a policeman shot somebody in the head. We are getting reports that they have opened fire on these protesters, some of whom who are waving the American flag. Down with communism. Lanave said that there are more witness videos, but since the Cuban government disrupted internet connections, it has been impossible to smuggle out the videos. Patrick Ottman, CNN's Havana-based correspondent, said locals know the government shuts down the internet to shut up critics, but Cuban officials haven't talked about the tactic. Not that I like CNN or believe what they're reporting. NetBlock says, confirmed, social media and messaging platforms disrupted in Cuba from Friday to Monday on state-run internet provider Cuba. Network data corroborate reports of outages amid protests for artistic freedom in Havana. Incident duration around 3 days. Andy Gomez, a retired professor of Cuban studies at the University of Miami, and other experts said the government's repression after the protest is not surprising. They don't want the images that we saw yesterday being shown around the world, said Gomez, the former dean of international studies at UM. Lanave said his friend in Havana also told him that he is pretty certain there are foreign nationals working with Cuban police. He told him there are witnesses who said some of the officers were dressed as civilians, had strong accents. Russians. He saw how they looked. He said it sounded like they were Russian, Lanave said. Orlando Gutierrez Baronet of the Cuban Democratic Directorate, a Miami-based organization that advocates for democracy in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, said he fears Russians and Chinese agents will help Cuban police officers enforce a violent crackdown. We are asking for the international community led by the United States to intervene, to protect the Cuban people from a bloodbath, Gutierrez Baronet said during a news conference Monday in Miami-Dade County. Gomez and Michael Bustamante, an assistant professor of Latin American history at Florida International University, agreed with Gutierrez Baronet, who earned a doctorate from UM on the philosophy of international studies. Quote, "It seems difficult or unlikely on the surface that things would continue at kind of the pace they did yesterday, given that government security forces are clearly out in force." Lanave said that the violence and fear his friends are experiencing needs a response from Americans who care about human rights. He said Cuba has a special place in his heart. Havana was the paradise of North America in the late 1950s, before communism took hold. Lanave said he and his friends used to take a bus from New York to Florida. He said they traveled to Key West, where they would hop on a ferry to enjoy the nightlife in Havana. Out of Key West, there were 2 or 3 ferry boats. You would drive your car right onto the ferry, and when you got to Cuba, you drove it off. Everybody went to the Tropicana. It was loaded with Americans and Europeans. It was like Las Vegas. Lanave said he traveled to Cuba again when Americans were allowed back to the island. His friends had warned him. The glitz had faded, and the patina had turned into ruin. Still, he said he was shocked to see how empty the stores were. "I saw the desperation in people's faces," said Lanave, who has a practice as a life coach. Lanave said he met his Cuban friends' relatives. He said he met an underpaid surgeon who was going to work on a bicycle and a physician who was hitchhiking to work. He has thought about them during the coronavirus pandemic. It was a shame the amount of suffering and pain that these people were at because they wouldn't even look you in the eye, Lanave said, adding it was alarming to think that the situation had gotten any worse. Now, I'll tell you, I don't trust a lot of this reporting. I don't know for sure, but that's why it's a problem that Cuba shut down the internet. If they are on the right side of history, if they are actually defending the revolution and the people, let the people speak. You see, on the internet, it's not just dissidents who have a chance to speak or show videos. It's everyone. And if the overwhelming majority of people in Cuba support what's happening and oppose the rioters and the protesters, they'd say so, wouldn't they? They'd show videos of the rioters smashing windows and starting fires. No, the government shut down the internet so that no one could speak. Why? Because it's probably the truth that people in Cuba are revolting against communist dictatorship. Hey, don't take it from me. How about Brian Stelter of CNN, who tweeted, restricting internet access has become a tried and true method of stifling dissent by authoritarian regimes around the world, alongside government-supported disinformation campaigns and propaganda. Sound familiar? Amazing to hear it come out of Brian Stelter's mouth. The guy is as duplicitous as they come. Yeah, that's what they're doing in the U.S. They're stifling dissent online. You can't even have opinions about the election on YouTube. So they say, we shouldn't let them shut down the internet. But in the U.S. they should, because I'm a private company. Sure, Brian, sure. Ron DeSantis says he wants to provide internet access to Cuba to get around their government shutdown. Now, my understanding is they've restarted the internet. We don't know for sure. I think it is being reported, however. DeSantis said Thursday he wants Florida companies to provide internet connection to residents in Cuba as the island entered its third day of protests amid widespread internet shutdowns that have hindered the flow of information. Quote, what does the regime do when you start to see these images? They shut down the internet. They don't want the truth to be out. They don't want people to be able to communicate, said DeSantis during a roundtable with Republican lawmakers and members of the Cuban exile community in Miami. And so one of the things I think we should be able to do with our private companies or with the U.S. is to provide some of that internet via satellite. We have companies on the Space Coast that launch these things. Without providing details on how to turn on remote hotspots to give Cubans Wi-Fi connection, DeSantis added he would make some calls to see what are our options to make it happen. I don't exactly know what you could do. You know, if you stay off of Cuban international waters, you can try to broadcast, set up some cell towers and try and capture some data and broadcast some kind of cell network. But the phone's got to be programmed for it, so they might have to spoof some towers. It doesn't sound too easy. I don't know what their solution is going to be. I think the people of Cuba are just going to have to fight against the communist authoritarians, rise up, and they're going to have to win. I'm a big fan of peaceful non-compliance, non-violent civil disobedience and resistance. But when you have authoritarian communists shooting and killing people, I don't know what you do. See, in the U.S., we don't have that. The cops arrest people and they get cut loose right away. You see how this works? You see who the good guys are? The police in this country got a lot of problems in the United States. Don't get me wrong. They definitely need reform. They make the arrests of these people and the DAs just cut them loose. So the problem, I suppose, is that their allies, the authoritarians, are actually in the government and providing them with leeway. Because you can see how the government goes after the January 6th dissidents. Russia criticized this as well. That's my fear, that the elements of the Democratic Party have lost it, and they're going to start implementing not too dissimilar things. Now, the mayor of Miami has gone a little bit further than I think anybody should. Mediaite reports mayor of Miami on bombing Cuba. That option is one that has to be explored. No, I'm not so sure about that. I don't think we need to explore bombing Cuba. Okay, let's take the light approach here and say, we'll have a conversation about it, I suppose, but I don't see any circumstance in which that makes sense. First and foremost, we are in fourth and fifth generational warfare, and China, Iran, and Russia are warning us about military intervention. So what do you do? Nothing. We're not Cuba. We're not Cubans. We're Americans. America should not be intervening in all of these other foreign affairs. Now, I understand there's a lot of people in Florida who are Cuban, who are in exile, but that's just it. You're in exile. The rest of this country should not get trapped up in foreign entanglements for your personal worldview. I sympathize, I empathize with the people of Cuba, and I hope they defeat the authoritarians. But imagine if we let in massive groups of people from one country, and then they all vote, or at least apply pressure that pushes us in a direction to support them. What will this country be other than forever the world police? America's supposed to be its own country, protecting its own borders. That's not what we are at this point. Mediaite reports Miami Mayor Francis Suarez appeared on Fox News Tuesday to offer suggestions of the United States on how the U.S. should respond to Cuba, where tens of thousands of protests have risen up. Quote, it is difficult for any elected official, Republican or Democrat, not to take the side of the Cuban people when they see images of people risking their lives protesting in the streets, he said. What should be being contemplated right now is a coalition of potential military action in Cuba, similar to what happened in both administrations, in both Republican and Democratic administrations. And Republican, with Bush in Panama, they deposed Noriega. And that country had peaceful democracy for decades. And you had interventions by a Democratic president when they took out a terrorist and saved taking out Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. It's a sovereign country where they took out a terrorist and saved probably thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. And President Clinton in Kosovo intervening in a humanitarian issue with airstrikes. So there have been many, many opportunities in the history of, are you suggesting airstrikes in Cuba? McCallum interrupted. What I'm suggesting is that option is one that has to be explored and cannot be just simply discarded as an option that is not on the table. Suarez responded. And there's a variety of ways the military can do it, but that's something that needs to be discussed and needs to be looked at as a potential option, in addition to a variety of other options that can be discussed. Not a fan at all. But let me tell you, there are people in Cuba, they want to escape communism. I believe we should allow them to have refugee status. I've said the same thing for the actual refugees coming through Mexico and from Honduras or wherever. The issue is that 90+% of the people coming from to the southern border are not actual refugees. We can look at what's happening in Cuba and see that people are scared. They could be disappeared, killed. And if they want to come to Florida and Florida agrees to accept them, that should be the case. However, the Democrats don't think so. We have this tweet from Buck Sexton, quoting Tom Elliott. DH Secretary Ali Mayorkas threatens fleeing Cuban refugees. Quote, allow me to be clear. If you take to the sea, you will not come to the U.S. Again, I repeat, do not risk your life attempting to enter the United States illegally. You will not come to the United States. That's strange. What was Joe Biden saying about the people at the border? What has Kamala Harris been saying about the people at the border? All right, recently, Kamala Harris said, do not come. Do not come. Yeah, when Trump said it, they called him a racist. What about these people? The Biden administration ended Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. So now the people who come from the southern border are being allowed into the U.S. And we even saw a video where the Biden administration was smuggling children, trafficking them. That's human trafficking. There's a video of them trafficking children into Tennessee. It was secret human smuggling. That is human trafficking. And the Republicans in Tennessee were shocked. They didn't know what was happening. Under the, it's illegal what they're doing, violating state sovereignty and their laws. It's disgusting and horrifying. Now I wonder what comes next for us. This is sparked by high food prices, a lack of opportunity, a crumbling economy. And what do we have in the United States? There's a story right now about the Delta variant. This TV personality got very sick, apparently, even though she was fully vaccinated. I don't know what to say all about that, but there's concern that the lockdowns may come back. But I don't think it's so much to do with the lockdowns necessarily. I mean, the lockdowns already did their damage. They destroyed, tens of thousands of small businesses. Now people are dependent on big box stores and massive corporations. And many people are just effectively destitute. The homeless population has been climbing because people couldn't live this way. You know, middle class people were able to survive a lot of the lockdown. Lower class people working hourly and paycheck to paycheck. What happens when they couldn't afford anything anymore? The homeless population started skyrocketing. The cost of food is skyrocketing. And where does that leave us? The Twitter account For America says, thanks, Joe, and shows this consumer price index, all the percentage increases. Price increase as economy reopens. June consumer price index year over year. Car rentals, 87%. Used cars, 45%. Gas, 45%. Airfare, 24%. Bacon is up 8%. Fruit is up 7%. Shoes, 6.5%. Fresh fish, 6.4%. Milk up 5%. It's going to hit everybody. Is it possible that we are entering some kind of very serious, chaotic time? Yeah, it is. Joe Biden keeps bringing up the Civil War. Joe Biden said that we are facing our greatest political challenge since the Civil War. Joe Biden said it no longer matters who votes, it matters who counts the votes. Biden said that. So years ago, when I said that this conflict, the culture war, will reach the highest level of government, and I had so many conservatives and leftists saying, it's not true, you're an idiot. And now Joe Biden has been espousing the leftist rhetoric and flat out says it matters only who counts the votes. That is fascism. Okay. Joe Biden, maybe not a fascist, because they want more global domination, but I guess the fascists did too, whatever. Now, Joe Biden is a crackpot authoritarian who will take power by any means necessary. And they say the same thing of Trump. So I'll tell you this. I think one side is objectively correct when we look at the Democrats and say they're insane. But the sentiment is that both sides are looking for war, or at least looking at war. You look at Cuba, man. Don't be surprised if what's happening in South Africa and Cuba does come here. It'll look different. Whoa, the people in the United States own a lot of guns. So it'll be interesting, as the curse goes. May you live in interesting times. You know, early 1700s, would I call it interesting times? Not all that much. Most people's lives were routine. Wake up, go farm, go home, go to sleep. Wake up, go farm, go home, go to sleep. Now, we're trapped in interesting times. Communication technology is rampant. Our technological advancement has brought us to the point where we mass produce food and we have obese, homeless people. We're in interesting times. We're facing a very serious moral, philosophical, and political crisis. Joe Biden is not the answer. He's a problem. I'm not entirely convinced Trump would be the answer. I don't know for sure. I can just tell you that as the SPLC likes to drag me, because I noted that civil war seems inevitable, because a bunch of right-wing individuals were wearing shirts calling for a second civil war, they insult me over an observation. I don't want a civil war to happen. I want people to chill and go watch movies and have a good time. But what happens when you have Princeton professors, leftists, saying we're in a cold civil war? What happens when you have national security experts 3 years ago saying we are very likely going to enter a civil war? What happens now when you have Joe Biden saying we're going to make a list of people who are right-wing extremists? We're facing the greatest threat since the Civil War, the insurrectionists, and the FBI says rat out your friends and neighbors. Where do you think all of that goes? We'll see. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you all then.